Hello? Can you hear me? Good. Yeah, everything's fine then. Okay. So first of all, welcome to this talk. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to get started actually with a quick question. Do you actually remember the time when you wrote your first line of code? It's like, this magical time. I remember myself, I don't know, writing code in my computer and then pressing the compile button. And of course, it doesn't work the first time. But still, that doesn't make it not special, right? And then from that time, as developers, as engineers, as professionals, when we start growing, we start learning, we start turning coffee into lines of code. And all these nights that we spend alone in front of the computer. But there's also mistakes, right? We start with our first mistakes. I'm a person who have made a lot of mistakes related to software engineering. And I'm here to tell you. And I think any person who have never tried anything new is someone probably who never made a mistake. You really, really need to make mistakes in order to learn. And I'm going to get started with a little story when I really screw things up. And before joining IBM, that was like 4 months ago, I used to work in the music industry at a company called SoundCloud as part of core engineering on the mobile team. So I remember my first day, I remember my first week, and at some point, you know what, after 1 week, someone of the team asked me, would you be interested in being the release captain? Release captain. And I said, of course. Challenge accepted. And it's going to be my first big thing, in the company. And just to give you a little bit more of context, what happened is that I really made a big fail there. Why? Just to give you this overview, this is how actually the architecture was back in those days. So basically, we had a backend, running a bunch of microservices. We would have here a layer on top of those microservices, and that would feed, outputs to our clients. In this case, both iOS and Android, and the web. So we call this pattern BFFs, which is called backend for frontends. So what happened? Here's the issue. As you can see, that's me. And at some point, I had to ship a new version of the app, right? And, there was a manual step involved there, which I didn't know. So we didn't have, back in those days, let's say a continuous integration, very mature. There were a lot of, things involved, a lot of moving parts we were not very aware of. Or at least I was not. So what happened is like we were serving 100 million users. And when I shipped the application, I forgot to change from production environment on the API, from dev, to production. So that meant that I was serving 100 million users with only 3 Mac Minis. So that was actually, I didn't notice, to be honest. Wasn't that time, I went back home, and at some point I just grabbed all my, I was really confident because I tested, the deliverable, locally, and it worked. It always works in my machine, right? And then I got home, and then I said, OK, so I'm going to grab all my clothes. I'm going to go for a run. I was into running back then. And I actually remember that I was I started running, and always do dog footing, which means eat your own food. Try your own products. That's what I did. I even remember the song I played. It was Guns N' Roses, Knocking on Heaven's Doors. And, and the thing is, like, I started running, and then I pressed the play, and it started knock, knock, knock. And it's like, oh my God, what's going on here? And sometimes you need to call your mom. But right after that moment, I screw up our core functionality. Our main functionality, which was playing a song, didn't work at all. And 30 seconds later, I got a phone call from the CEO of the company. That must not be big news, right? I mean, if you're the new person in the team, 1 week old, and and the exact words were, hello, Fernando? Yeah, same one. I was told that you're the release captain for this Android version. I am, indeed. I don't know if you noticed that, I cannot play a song there. And I hung up. I was so freaked out. It's like that I hung up. And it's that point in time when I just, needed a hero. So I called my mom. That was like 4 years ago. And sometimes you need to talk to someone, to slow things down. And I talked to my mom. And of course, she said, take it easy, my son. It's like, okay, Mom, I will. And after, a quick chat I had with her, was when I remember I translated all this conversation into a phrase and said, oops, may the force of failure be with you. And I always remember it. I think we are all human beings and we make mistakes, right? But I'm going to leave the end of the story till the end of the talk, and I will tell you why afterwards. But first, one thing. I think we all identified that with the fact that our software is terrible. That doesn't make it any special. I mean, we always deal with legacy code, issues, I don't know, these dark areas of the code base which no one wants to touch, right? And of course, I'm here to give you some hints, some tips in order to avoid, at least the basic ones, But first, let me classify or enumerate the types of mistakes that we can make in a software development cycle. So that includes products at a product level. We can fail at a product level. We can fail at a process level. We can fail at a code level. So I was actually diving into the internet and say, okay, I'm going to definitely check what's there. With all this trendiness around product, I said, okay, let's check it out. This Internet of Things, nowadays it's very popular. So the first thing that came to my mind, when I saw this, it's like smart spoon. So there is this smart spoon, and I said, okay, those products might be a big bet, right? So basically what it does is it measures how fast you're eating. And so if you're eating too fast, then it's going to open these holes that you can see on the picture. And it's going to put you, in a very weird situation, I would say, especially if you're, eating the soup or something. But that's not everything that it can do. It will compare your performance with other people in a cloud-based database. So, and the thing, it only cost €100. Pretty good. But that's the thing. So I was diving into all this, and then I saw, okay, the next one, I don't think we can live without it anymore. And let me introduce you the Throne Master. So the Throne Master is basically a product It's a smart toilet device. So, I mean, you can basically quantify your emotions in the toilet. You can actually know how much you spread. You can compete with your family. It's amazing. And then you can share all that in social networks, right? I don't want to see any of you running for this device now. But yeah, so I don't know if these products actually are failures or not, but trust me, it was worth putting them here. But let's get back to the reality then. Let's see what the future says about them. I'm going to actually probably try the Throne Master. It sounds promising. Anyway, then we have process mistakes. So getting back to my story, I think that was clear a failure within a process because I didn't know how to flip the switch, how to change from the development environment to the production environment. But we are here to talk about code. And for me, today was, the idea was to show you, to give you some tips and tricks how you can solve the most fundamental coding problems that we have in code bases. So let's get started then. The first one, readable code. I think code must be self-explanatory. For example, comments do not work. So basically, this is a piece of comment. It's a classic one, right? I mean, the author of this method, of this routine, just said, if you're going to waste some time trying to optimize this piece of code, just increase the counter so we know how much time we have wasted on this. They're always out to date, right? 42 hours currently. Or these two ones. This is a very normal situation. Sometimes you go back to some piece of code, right? So it's terrible, right? Don't tell me that this never happens to you. I'm pretty sure that that did. And the third one is actually mine, and it's related to the second one. Because I remember I was working on a system written in C#, and I put that comment. That was 10 years ago or something like that. And then I just checked it out and said, why I put this comment? And then I checked the code. It's, oh my God. I definitely need to sit down with someone here to just explain what's going on. I don't even understand it. So comments do not work. Your code should be self-explanatory. There are better ways, and we will see that you can rename things. Refactoring. Refactoring should always be our friend. Get better at that. Check this piece of code. Please don't get into details because it's a bit complex. It took me 2 hours actually to just see it, but I didn't understand what was going on there. Needed some help. What's basically happening there is this is a piece of code to find the shortest path in a red-black tree. It's a very complex piece of algorithm. And of course, we have this complexity in our code bases. But when you see these kind of things with not a correct naming, you had to use some kind of technique. You had to refactor this. Wouldn't it be easier if we just hide our complexity behind a facade pattern, or maybe by just extracting that piece of complex code and putting it inside a method, as we have done here? So hide complexity whenever it is. Just make the clients of your code feel comfortable with what you're writing. Another example, and I'm going to give credit to myself for this because I used to write my code when I started in Spanish. I'm from Argentina, by the way. And this is actually a piece of code. It's a Kotlin code. It's a programming language, the new programming language, well, not the new. But it's written in Finnish. I'm not against learning languages. Of course, it's the best thing ever. Ich lerne Deutsch eigentlich. Es ist nicht gut, aber noch nicht. But I remember like sitting down a few years ago. This is an example, but I had to migrate a system which was in Norwegian. Such a nightmare. I had to sit down with a translator and try to figure this out. So, code written in English. It's a universal communication tool. And pretty much all the programming languages out there are based in the English language. So basically, this piece of code turned out to be, it says, elokuvat means movies. So elokuvat, we learned something new here. Elokuvat, this is way more understandable, right? So please, code written in English. And there's this quote that you should always keep in mind. It's from John Woods. And whenever you're typing something, it's like, write your code as if the person who's going to read it is a serial killer, right? And the worst part is like, he or she knows where we live. And so keep that in mind when writing readable code. And my second tip, what about reinventing the wheel? I have reinvented the wheel so many times. But we love that, right? We instead of using external libraries which make our life easier, we prefer to reinvent the wheel. And again, credit to myself. 15 years ago, working in a bank system, needed to grab a bunch of files, compress them, and send them via email. So I decided, I'm not going to use the amazing consolidated WinRAR and WinZip. I'm going to create my UltraZip. And that's what I did. These are the numbers. So it would take like 10 times more. It would compress nothing. And I had a really hard time, figuring things out. And the things like, out of curiosity, I used the Huffman algorithms, which I learned in the university. I don't think these other two powerful tools are using them. So if you're going to reinvent the wheel, just do it for learning purpose. That's the thing. There are so many abstractions out there, people who are contributing to open source, and we can contribute, actually. That facilitates the way we develop software. And I have to say also that I work in a chat in Assembler. But at some point, my friend said, OK, maybe we can run a business around this. Really? And compete with WhatsApp? And it was actually working through parallel port. What for? So, reinventing the wheel for learning purpose. Naming things. Here we go. Naming is always complicated, and we as software developers, as engineers, we know that. And this is. I had to say that the next example is very recent. I just changed the package name just to not expose the person who wrote this code. But I was actually working in a code base, and then I wanted to parse some JSON, right? Some JSON file. And as an intuition, the first thing you do is you start typing, try to find a JSON parser. And when I started typing parser, then I came up, there is a JSON parser, there is a better JSON parser, and there is the best JSON parser. Which one would you use? Not the JSON one. If you have a better one, why not? Or if you have the best one, if you're going to use the better one, why not using the best one? So these kind of things, these little problems, we can solve them by just refactoring. There is a super nice deprecated annotation in Java and in many languages that we can use in order to deprecate things, deprecate APIs. And we can do something like this, right? We could rename things. Let's say, in this case, something as a legacy JSON parser with a deprecated annotation, and this pointing to the newer class implementation, right? Plus, nowadays, our IDEs will help us in order to figure out whether we are using deprecated or legacy code by warning us about it. Anti-patterns. We should be able to identify anti-patterns in our code. I mean, I'm not saying that we must learn them all, but at least the basic ones. Like got classes, got classes. I mean, we all suffer with got classes, right? All these big, huge classes of, I don't know, 10,000 lines of code no one wants to touch, doing so many things. But there are strategies. Just extract, things little by little, hide that again. This, instead of complexity, hide this behind a facade pattern, for example, or singletons. Singletons it could turn into anti-patterns when you're using them the wrong way. Let's say if you're saving global state and if you're in a multi-threaded environment, you must run into race conditions, deadlocks, and so forth. So be careful with that. And the most well-known lava anti-pattern. Lava anti-pattern stands for, when you have in your code base many ways of doing the same thing. You need to perform a network request, and it turns out there's 5 different ways of doing the same thing. So that means your code is not consistent. I don't have a reference, a feature that I can check it out and, copy. Don't do that. Copy that. Or at least, base my code into that for consistency and for having my code base healthy. And of course, that's a basic software engineering practice. Learn the principles. They're there. If you're coming from the object-oriented programming approach, you have the solid principles. They're well-known. But there is equivalence in functional programming. Nowadays, becoming trendier and trendier. Then, of course, the same way as we were talking about anti-patterns, there's patterns. What's the concept of a pattern? A pattern is a proved solution to a recurring problem. So if we can detect this part of the code where we can apply a pattern, we will gain consistency. We will have a common language because we all know patterns. And we will definitely say, oh, this piece of code is solving this in a very clean and healthy way. And the Boy Scout rule. I don't know if you're familiar with the Boy Scout rule, but basically means that you should always be a good Boy Scout. You have to always leave your place cleaner as how you found it. Little by little. If you have the chance to just rename a little method, don't send these 5,000 lines of code, pull requests with a refactor no one understands, right? That happens. And why all this? Because code is communication between people. We are going to write code. We spend a lot of time reading code. Code is art. Code is communication. Of course, it runs in computers, but computers are also means to reach out to people. So people is always involved. And remember the serial killer thing, okay? And as an extra ball, I think everything is not about coding. I think there are other processes involved into coding. And let me mention a few of them which have given me really good results. So work as a team. Communication is always very important. Continuous improvement, as we have seen, little by little, but always keep that in mind to get better. TDD. TDD stands for test-driven development. I'm not 100% TDD person, but it's one more tool in my toolbox. Pair programming could help. A couple of extra eyes usually help a lot to develop higher quality code. And of course, a continuous integration pipeline. Automate as much as you can. Don't do as we did in the past, and we made this mistake. And of course, always use the best tool for the right job. You have tools out there. You can do Stack Overflow driven development. I think pretty much we're all good at that. Copy and pasting code from Stack Overflow to our code base, and magically works. I'm good at that. I can give you many tips. And the zero bugs application. Probably you might say, that doesn't exist. I agree. But zero bug applications doesn't mean that you will not have bugs at all. But you will have strategies in order to eradicate or minimize the number of bugs that you have. So please spend time in code quality. Your colleagues will really appreciate that. And getting back to the story, to the end, let's rewind. It's like, may the force of failure be with you. So the solution was pretty straightforward, I had to say. And then, because we were pointing to our development environment, and then I called someone from DevOps, and this person actually increased the amount of instances of our development. Fortunately, there were not many difference between development and production. And you have no idea how much I ran when I was going back home in order to fix that. If you're on Strava, I beat my own record. I can tell that. And I rename it, saying like, biggest mistake. I'm going to be the worst, oh shit. I'm going to be the worst SoundCloud employee ever. But things turned to be really good. And the best thing, there was no finger pointing. No one actually blamed me for that. No one. Of course, we had a retrospective. We got the lesson learned. And of course, you have to always learn out of mistakes. Have a hero, someone you can learn from. And my dear developers, always test your software. Don't write code without tests. Definitely would have loved to get deeper into that, but please test your software. And of course, share your experiences. So we are not alone. We don't feel isolated here making all these big mistakes. And please, or maybe in order to wrap up, may the force of failure be with you. Thank you very much.